Leaving is often the most dangerous part of an abusive relationship. People who have never lived through long-term abuse sometimes imagine escape as a clear decision followed by a clean ending. They picture someone finally reaching a breaking point, packing their belongings, walking out the door, and beginning a new life somewhere else. But real escape rarely unfolds that way. By the time many survivors finally try to leave, they are emotionally exhausted, financially trapped, isolated from support systems, and carrying years of fear inside their nervous system. They know exactly what the person they are leaving is capable of because they have already survived it privately for years. And often, the abuser senses the loss of control long before the survivor actually escapes. That is where Bonnie's story enters in part 5. By the end of part 4, she had emotionally reached the edge of what she could endure. Years of violence, humiliation, fear, addiction surrounding her, financial destruction, emotional exhaustion, and isolation had hollowed her life into something that barely resembled living anymore. But underneath that exhaustion, something had started changing quietly. For the first time in decades, Bonnie was no longer trying to survive the relationship. She was trying to survive long enough to leave it. Welcome to No One Is Normal, the podcast where real stories remind us that none of us are alone. You can also visit the website www.bradhhill.com or www.nooneisnormal.co for resources, updates, and future podcast episodes. I am Brad H. Hill, and each week we talk about the messy, the complicated, and the deeply human moments that shape us and remain in our memories. I am not here to tell anyone how to live. I am here to offer the stories, the insights that made me realize that no one is normal, including me, because healing starts when self-honesty begins. Bonnie still remembers the day she officially filed for divorce. What surprised her most was the feeling that came with it. It was not peace yet, because she still did not feel safe, and it was not excitement, because fear was still attached to almost every part of her future. But somewhere underneath the anxiety, she felt something she had not experienced in years. Relief. Not overwhelming relief. More like the first small breath after being underwater too long. The divorce became final in September of 2013, after the mandatory waiting period. Bonnie says she remembers sitting in court emotionally detached from most of what was happening around her. Part of her still could not believe that after more than 2 decades together, the relationship that had controlled nearly every part of her adult life was legally ending. Even then, the control had not completely disappeared. He pressured her to keep his last name, and she agreed because arguing no longer felt emotionally worth the risk. She also agreed to give him half of her thrift savings account, even though she was not legally required to. By that point, Bonnie was not focused on fairness or winning. She was trying to reduce conflict however she could, because she still feared what he might do if he felt backed into a corner. That detail matters, because many survivors are not making decisions from a place of empowerment while leaving. They are making decisions while calculating danger constantly. At 42 years old, Bonnie was finally legally on her own for the first time in her adult life. But emotionally, freedom still felt fragile and unfamiliar. During the months surrounding the divorce, she slowly began trying things she had denied herself for years. One of those things was modeling. When she was younger, it had been a dream of hers, but throughout the relationship, he mocked her appearance relentlessly. He called women who modeled whores. He insulted her body. He made her feel ashamed for wanting attention, confidence, or independence. Then one day she saw an ad for a local bikini contest, and despite everything, she entered. She did not win, but that was not really the important part. What mattered was the experience itself. For the first time in years, she found herself around people who encouraged her instead of humiliating her. People complimented her instead of tearing her down. She began participating in small modeling shoots and reconnecting with pieces of herself that had disappeared underneath survival for decades. Reading that section affected me because healing often begins quietly. Sometimes it begins with someone allowing themselves to do one small thing they were previously forbidden from doing, one small act of reclaiming identity after years of emotional control. And for Bonnie, even stepping in front of a camera again became symbolic of something much larger emotionally, the possibility that she still existed underneath the fear. Around that same period, Bonnie posted a photo online from a Native American themed bikini shoot. The comments quickly became cruel. Some people mocked her appearance publicly, criticized the photos, and turned the post into an opportunity to insult someone they did not even know. Then someone defended her. That person was me. At the time, we were strangers connected loosely through mutual friends online. I saw people attacking her publicly and responded because honestly, the comments were unnecessarily cruel. Afterward, Bonnie messaged me privately to thank me, and we started talking casually online. At first, it was nothing more than conversation. But looking back now, what stands out most to me was how unfamiliar kindness seemed to her emotionally. Bonnie had spent so many years adapting around criticism, unpredictability, accusations, and emotional volatility that ordinary conversations sometimes seemed to make her nervous. If I did not respond quickly enough to a message, she worried she had said something wrong. If I complimented her, she often deflected it immediately because praise felt harder for her to trust than criticism. Even casual support seemed to catch her off guard because she had spent decades surviving in an environment where vulnerability usually led to pain rather than safety. During those early conversations, it was noticeable how emotionally careful she seemed all the time. It felt like she was constantly measuring whether people were safe before allowing herself to relax even slightly. At the time, I understood pieces of it, but I do not think I fully understood how deeply fear had shaped her daily emotional life until much later. When someone spends decades surviving volatility, their nervous system adapts around it. They become hyper aware of tone shifts, emotional reactions, pauses, wording, facial expressions, and mood changes because survival depended on monitoring those things for years. Even normal conversations can feel emotionally risky afterward because part of the brain still expects punishment, anger, humiliation, or instability. And Bonnie was still living inside that fear while we were talking. After the divorce, Bonnie and her ex still lived together temporarily because neither of them could afford separate housing immediately. He agreed mostly because he believed she had nowhere else to go and assumed eventually she would stop trying to leave permanently. But by that point, Bonnie had emotionally reached a breaking point. One night, he started another argument because she would not buy him more beer before work. He came into her room screaming, swinging at her several times while accusing her of abandoning him because his health was deteriorating. He was slower physically than he had been years earlier, and Bonnie managed to move away before he landed a full punch. That moment changed something inside her permanently. She decided to move into the partially finished attic because she knew climbing the stairs was physically difficult for him after his stroke. She told him she wanted somewhere quieter to sleep before work, but really she was trying to create distance and safety, however she could. Over the next several months, the attic became her hiding place. She slept on hardwood flooring, with minimal belongings around her. Most nights she came home from work, climbed upstairs quietly, locked herself away, and tried to avoid contact with him as much as possible. She spent nearly every waking hour either working, hiding, or planning how to someday leave. The attic itself became symbolic of how small Bonnie's world had become emotionally by that point. She slept on hard flooring with only a few belongings around her, trying to create enough distance from him to make it through another night safely. Some evenings, she would lie awake listening carefully to sounds downstairs, trying to figure out whether he was drinking heavily, whether strangers were in the house again, or whether she might need to stay completely silent to avoid another confrontation. That kind of hypervigilance changes people physically over time. Even when exhausted, the body often refuses to fully relax because part of the nervous system remains focused on danger constantly. Bonnie says she rarely slept deeply during those months. She would wake up repeatedly throughout the night, listening for movement, yelling, footsteps, or doors opening. By then, fear had become so normalized inside the house that her body no longer understood how to fully rest. At the same time, she was secretly trying to build another life piece by piece. A towel from a thrift store, a cheap lamp, kitchen utensils, small household items most people never think twice about became symbols of independence for her. Every item hidden away represented possibility. Not certainty yet, but possibility. One day, after another argument, Bonnie finally told him directly that she was leaving for real, and that the divorce was not simply paperwork anymore. He laughed at first, then his expression changed completely. He told her she had nowhere to go, no money, and no way out. He said if she ever truly left him, he would find her and kill her. Because he had nothing left to lose, that threat stayed inside her constantly afterward. And honestly, this part of the story matters deeply because it explains something many survivors understand, but outsiders often do not. Leaving does not immediately create safety. In many abusive relationships, leaving is the moment danger escalates most because the abuser realizes control is slipping away. Bonnie worked constantly during this period, trying to save enough money to eventually leave. She worked overnight shifts and then cleaned roofing debris during the day whenever she could. Some days she barely slept more than an hour or two before starting another shift. Then one afternoon after roofing work, she woke up from a short nap and started heading out the door for work. Her car was gone. At first, she genuinely thought it had been stolen. Then he laughed and told her he sold it to the junkyard for drinking money. That moment says so much about the emotional reality Bonnie was living inside. The car was not simply transportation. It represented independence, work, mobility, and possibility. He destroyed it because he knew she was trying to build a way out. Still, Bonnie kept adapting. She called coworkers, begging for rides, until eventually she found a $400 vehicle, just reliable enough to get her to work. She secretly bought household items from thrift stores and hid them away, one piece at a time, preparing for the day she could finally move out. At the same time, she was drowning financially because the IRS began garnishing her wages over unpaid taxes connected to the roofing company he had put in her name years earlier. Bonnie eventually discovered he had never paid taxes for the business, despite repeatedly assuring her everything had been handled. The IRS told her she owed $22,000. Reading through that section feels emotionally crushing because even years later, she was still paying financially for destruction she never created herself. Every direction she turned, another consequence of his choices seemed to be waiting there, and still she kept trying to leave. Eventually, she confided in a co-worker about her situation. Bonnie could not qualify for a loan alone because her credit had been destroyed over the years, but the co-worker agreed to co-sign for her. Bonnie says she cried afterwards because for the first time in years, someone believed her enough to help create an actual opening toward escape. What affected me most emotionally about this section was realizing how close Bonnie had come to believing escape was impossible altogether. Years of financial control, emotional abuse, threats, destroyed credit, fear, isolation, and instability had slowly convinced her that survival was the only future available to her. That is one of the cruelest parts of long-term abuse. Over time, it does not just control someone physically or emotionally. It starts reshaping what they believe is realistically possible for their own life. And yet somewhere underneath all of that exhaustion, there was still a part of Bonnie quietly preparing for freedom, even before she fully believed she would reach it. Every hidden household item, every extra work shift, every secret plan, and every dollar saved represented a person trying to rebuild hope privately while still living inside fear publicly. That emotional contradiction runs through this entire chapter. Bonnie was terrified almost constantly during those final months, but fear no longer completely erased the part of her that wanted to survive. A few weeks later, Bonnie found an apartment that allowed pets. That mattered enormously because she genuinely believed he would kill her animals if she left them behind. The apartment itself was not even fully ready yet. Repairs and painting still needed to be completed before move-in day. But Bonnie kept everything secret because she feared what would happen if he discovered she had secured a place to go. Then one day everything exploded. She was downstairs doing laundry when he came into the basement, confronting her about packed boxes he had discovered upstairs. He shoved her hard enough to stumble backward, and then struck her across the face. Before she could fully react, he grabbed a kitchen knife. He told her she was not leaving alive. Bonnie says he lunged toward her chest, trying to stab her. Because his balance and coordination had deteriorated after the stroke, she managed to move enough that the blade only cut her arm, instead of hitting her directly in the chest. Then she ran. That scene honestly reads like something from a movie, because it was terrifying. Bonnie sprinted toward the attic because she needed her work clothes, phone charger, and belongings, while believing the attic stairs might slow him down long enough for her to escape. By then, she had already started creating survival systems inside the house. She hung cans on the attic door handle intentionally, so she would hear them move if he came upstairs after her. Then she heard them rattling. He was climbing the stairs with the knife. That detail stayed with me, because people do not create warning systems inside their own home, unless fear has already become part of daily existence. Bonnie says he staggered into the attic, still screaming insults and threats, while holding the knife. At that moment, she genuinely believed he was going to kill her. Her body fully shifted into survival mode. She grabbed her phone, moved around him during another attempt to corner her, sprinted downstairs, ran outside, locked herself inside her vehicle, and called the police while shaking uncontrollably. Even then, fear still shaped her decisions. She minimized what happened. She hid the cut on her arm. She never mentioned the knife directly because years of threats had conditioned her to fear what would happen after police left more than the assault itself. That reality says so much about how prolonged abuse reshapes survival instincts psychologically over time. Police arrested him for assault. Bonnie says when officers told him he was going to jail, something terrifying shifted emotionally in his face. He screamed threats at her in front of police officers and became so enraged that Bonnie got scared enough to withdraw the restraining order officers initially encouraged her to pursue. That detail matters because survivors often make decisions outsiders misunderstand while trying to calculate danger in real time. After police removed him from the house, Bonnie went directly to work. The next morning, she contacted the apartment manager, begging for early access because she feared for her safety. The apartment was still unfinished, but after hearing the situation, management handed her the keys anyway. Then Bonnie moved as fast as she possibly could, before work, after work, between shifts, whenever she had even a few free minutes. The first things she moved were her pets, because she genuinely believed he would hurt them if he discovered she was leaving permanently. That fear was real to her, because violence had already shaped nearly every major decision in her life for decades. Monday morning, police informed her he had already been released from jail. Bonnie says panic immediately took over her body. She packed whatever fit into her vehicle and left immediately, intentionally abandoning most shared belongings, because she did not want reminders of him following her into whatever life came next. And then came the first night alone. Honestly, I think this may be one of the most emotionally important moments in the entire story. Bonnie says she felt relief and terror at the exact same time. Part of her understood she was physically out of the house for the first time in decades, but another part of her remained convinced he might still appear at any moment and punish her for leaving. She hid her vehicle inside the garage, installed deadbolts immediately, and constantly looked over her shoulder whenever she left the apartment. Even after moving into the apartment, Bonnie says part of her still expected him to appear unexpectedly. Years of living inside fear had conditioned her body to anticipate danger constantly, and safety did not immediately feel believable, simply because the address changed. She found herself checking parking lots before leaving work, looking over her shoulder in grocery stores, and listening carefully for unfamiliar sounds outside the apartment late at night, Simple routines still carried anxiety. Walking to her vehicle after work could trigger panic because she worried he might be waiting nearby. Unexpected knocks at the door immediately raised her heart rate. Sometimes she woke up disoriented in the middle of the night, expecting to hear yelling downstairs, before remembering she was finally alone. That part of healing often goes unseen by people outside trauma. Escaping danger physically is one thing. Teaching the nervous system that danger is no longer constant can take years longer. Even after Bonnie escaped physically, his attempts to maintain control did not stop immediately. Some calls were manipulative and emotional, with him begging her to come back or insisting he could not survive without her. Other conversations turned hostile quickly, shifting into insults, threats, accusations, or demands for money. The emotional whiplash felt familiar to her because it mirrored the same instability she had survived for decades inside the relationship itself. And despite everything he had done, Bonnie still continued helping him financially at first, because he had no income, and because compassion was still part of who she was, despite everything she survived. That honestly says something profound about her character. Most people would understand rage completely. Most people would understand revenge. Most people would understand walking away permanently without another word. But Bonnie still brought groceries, helped temporarily with medication costs, and tried helping him survive even after finally escaping him. Eventually, though, she realized there would never be a peaceful ending with him emotionally. One day she arrived dropping off groceries and discovered he intentionally opened all the windows and turned the heat to maximum because utilities were still in her name. He wanted her financially punished for leaving. That was the moment Bonnie emotionally understood something fully. There was never going to be closure with him, only distance. Eventually he moved out, but not before destroying the rental property, breaking windows, punching holes in walls, and leaving Bonnie financially responsible for thousands of dollars in damages and utility bills. Even after she escaped physically, she was still cleaning up destruction he'd left behind. This chapter affected me differently than the earlier parts of Bonnie's story, because this is where fear finally collides with action. For years she imagined leaving privately, while believing escape might never actually happen. Then suddenly every survival instinct she had developed over decades became necessary all at once. What stayed with me most was how dangerous every step of leaving actually became. The knife, the threats, the secrecy, the moving between shifts, the fear for her animals, the fear of being found. None of it felt exaggerated emotionally while reading it. It felt terrifyingly real. And honestly, I think this chapter answers the question survivors hear far too often. Why didn't you leave sooner? Because leaving can get people killed. This chapter hit me hard emotionally, because it shows what survival actually looks like at the edge. Bonnie was emotionally exhausted beyond words by this point. She was financially trapped, terrified, overworked, isolated, and carrying decades of trauma inside her nervous system. But underneath all of that fear, something finally became stronger than staying. Bonnie's decision to leave did not come from suddenly feeling powerful or fearless. If anything, she was more terrified than ever. During those final months, what changed was the realization that staying had become more dangerous emotionally and physically than the fear of leaving itself. I think people often imagine courage as feeling fearless, but this chapter proves something very different. Bonnie was terrified through almost every part of this process. She did not leave because fear disappeared. She left because eventually survival itself demanded movement even while the fear remained. And maybe that is what real courage actually looks like sometimes. Not everyone listening to this episode has survived domestic violence, but many people understand what it feels like to live inside circumstances that make change feel impossible. Fear, finances, isolation, shame, trauma, responsibility, children, housing, threats, and emotional exhaustion can all trap people in painful situations far longer than outsiders understand. Sometimes people are not staying because they want to. Sometimes they are staying because survival has convinced them there is no safe way out yet. If this chapter connected with you emotionally, I hope you remember something important. People trying to survive impossible situations do not need judgment. Most people trying to leave abusive situations are searching for safety, practical support, financial stability, emotional reassurance, and enough time to rebuild a nervous system that has spent years adapting around fear. By the end of this chapter, Bonnie had finally done what once felt impossible. She escaped. Her escape was messy, frightening, emotionally exhausting, and filled with uncertainty. But leaving did not suddenly erase the fear she had carried for decades. Even after getting out physically, part of her still expected punishment for leaving because survival had conditioned her to anticipate danger constantly. But despite all of that fear, she survived. And in part 6, the story finally shifts away from survival and towards something Bonnie had not fully experienced before: peace, healing, safety, love, and learning who she actually was outside of fear. Because escaping trauma is not the end of the story. Learning how to live afterward is. Just a reminder, the stories and conversations in this podcast are for informational and personal reflection only. Nothing shared here should be taken as medical, legal, or professional advice. Always speak with a qualified professional about your own personal situation. Thank you for listening to No One Is Normal. If today's message resonated with you, you can find the book No One Is Normal on Amazon and Kindle, and explore more resources at www.bradhhill.com or www.nooneisnormal.co. Remember, you weren't meant to be normal, you were meant to be you.